My beloved teacher and mentor, the Reverend Jan Eller Isaacs, was diagnosed with cancer in 2022, about 6 months into her husband's cancer treatment. It was completely unfair, too much, wrong in the extreme. Jan continued caretaking her husband through his death, and then she had another couple of years with her children and her grandchildren before her own transition through the veil of this life and whatever lies beyond it. Jan was fiery and funny and loud. She wore big jade rings on every finger and had a fighting spirit with them. I met her at a minister's event in 2012 where she told a story in front of a room full of ministers about drinking and cursing and ministers acting foolish. She had the whole room in stitches and gasps and still ended on an ethical lesson. And I said, oh, I want to learn from her. Jan was one of the few women of her generation who managed to become a senior minister of a large Unitarian Universalist congregation. And she was wise and strong, and she suffered no fools. She was also a mystic. She loved poetry and recited it. She had a daily spiritual practice and a powerful intuition. When she was in her 20s and she met her husband, Rob, for the first time, she had an intuitive sense that her unborn children were waiting for her on the other side of that meeting. Those children, there are 3 of them, were Jan's life and her heart. She was an excellent minister, but she also centered parenting as a spiritual practice. She was an unparalleled hostess. She said seasonal decor was an offering. Hospitality was a core value for her because it was connected to her care for her people, starting with her immediate family and just radiating out love in concentric circles. 2 years ago, at the Senior Ministers of Large UU Congregations Conference in Puerto Rico, which had been one of the primary groups of Jan's ministry, we heard that Jan was beginning her transition from this life. This small group of ministers was one of Jan's closest communities in her life of ministerial service. We were reading poetry to one another just before we heard the news, and one of Jan's beloveds said in that poetry reading practice, "I'm thinking of Jan right now," and then told us a story about the poetry collection that she had put together for the group nearly a decade before, spiral-bound copies of photocopied poems, which was currently sitting on that minister's desk. 30 minutes later, the same group was playing a game of cards in the same room. A newcomer to the group was getting really competitive in the game when another one of Jan's beloveds came in and said, "Hey, I have some pastoral news to share." The newcomer, who was caught up in the card game, replied, "Pastoral schmasteral." Yes, even ministers can be a little callous sometimes. So, in that moment, instead of announcing the news that Jan was actively dying to the group, this person just pulled me aside and told me privately, I left the card game and I went to a different room in the hotel where people who had been close to Jan were telling stories about her. Then, about 30 minutes after that, someone came knocking on our door to tell us that the room that we had just been playing cards in had been evacuated because it had filled with smoke. Was the hotel on fire, we wondered? In our grief-induced haze in the storytelling room, we figured someone would let us know if the hotel was in fact on fire, and we just kept telling stories about Jan. I found out later that only one room in the hotel had filled with smoke. The room in which our senior ministers had been playing cards when the newbie dismissed the attempt to share news of Jan's death with pastoral schmasteral in order to keep the game going. Minutes later, the room, and only that room, filled with smoke, and everyone had to leave. Something about a light fixture shorting, I don't know. Later that night, the floor that I was sleeping on in the hotel, where Jan's best friends were also staying and a number of other ministers who were close to her were trying to sleep, our floor was disrupted by a conflict. I use that word loosely. A woman that was speaking a language I did not recognize was very upset. I didn't actually hear another person with whom she was in conflict, but it did sound like she was responding to something else. And she was running up and down the hallways of this floor with a lilt in her voice that I will never forget. She was, I don't know the language, she was going, for hours. I was talking on the phone with my best friend about Jan, and at some point in these hours of lilting conflict, I don't know, I had to laugh. I was like, Jan is pissed. She does not like dying, and she wants us all to know. The next day, we learned of Jan's death during another moment of poetry, when Aurora Levens Morales was reading her poems to us. It was February 14th, Valentine's Day, as well as, of course, because Jan is nothing if not playful, Ash Wednesday. It was a day dedicated to love, and Jan had dedicated her life to love, and ashes to ashes, dust to dust. So a group of us Unitarian Universalist ministers decided that we needed to go to the local closest Catholic church to receive ashes. We had missed the service due to a language error, and we walked into this church tear-streaked and grieving as everyone else was walking out. The warmest, most welcoming usher walked up to us while all of the rest of the ushers cleaned up after the hundreds of people were leaving the service, and we bumbled through trying to explain ourselves to this man in Spanish. But of course, this was the only usher in the room that spoke English, and he was so welcoming to our group of tender non-Catholics in desperate need of ritual. So he called over to one of the people who had been blessing folks with ashes during the service and told us all to get in line, explained to that person in Spanish what had happened, and then the ash giver blessed each of us in Spanish. Ashes to ashes and dust to dust. According to many religious traditions, this is the time of year when we remember our beloved dead, when we mark the time of the human descent into the underworld. The Celts teach that the veil between the worlds is thin right now. But for all of us who have lost someone that we love, the veil is always a little thin, isn't it? The line between the living and the dead, it gets crossed every time we remember them. And today, when we gathered, everyone in this room had someone to remember. Look at all of these lit candles. There wasn't a single person that hasn't been touched by loss. But those that we remember, they live on. They cross the line, the veil between the living and the dead, every time we carry on with the things that they loved, with the poetry, with the mascara perfection, with all the little beautiful details of their living, or maybe just the very big detail of the way we keep loving one another and this life, finding them again in that place that they now know best, where the river runs deep with gladness and the water over each stone sings our unforgotten names. This life includes death. There is no fixing that. All that we love, our own bodies, all of this, it's mortal. The only road to immortality is through each other, through our children, through telling the stories, through remembering them together and carrying them forward with us in what we do in the world. Love pulls us from the wreckage of loss again and again. And when we're grieving, when we're shouting and in pain, we hold one another in comfort and compassion. We are that parent right now holding the child, walking out and rocking them. We are Austin's friend Kelsey, wrapping him in a bear hug. We are his sister, bringing him the peace that his mom always knew. We are the care of those strangers in that Catholic church in Puerto Rico, blessing a group of Unitarian Universalist ministers with ashes. We comfort one another. We tell the old stories. We hold on to the memories with gratitude for their lives and the fact that we were able to know them, and we carry forward their love that still lives in us. Our beloved dead continue to live through the veil, through us now. May it be so.